Seasons changed. Adam came to me with a request. So small, so harmless. Something from when he was little. A memory wrapped in softer times. A comfort we both pretended was still safe. But it wasn't. And somewhere in the quiet between my heartbeat and his, the ground shifted. I didn't even realize we had crossed a line until it was too late. Until we were both standing there, breathless, broken, too afraid to look each other in the eye. Even now, I wake up at night, heart racing, sheets twisted, reaching for answers that don't exist. Replaying that night over and over. Trying to find the exact moment when everything we were supposed to be shattered into something I don't even have words for. It didn't happen because I stopped loving my husband. It didn't happen because I wanted to betray everything we had. It happened because somewhere along the way, I forgot where surviving ended and destruction began. This isn't a story about monsters. It's not a story about victims either. It's a story about being human. About how grief and loneliness can twist your soul until you don't even recognize yourself anymore. And if you think you know what you would have done, trust me, you don't. Not until the night presses against you so hard that breathing feels like betrayal. Not until the silence gets so loud that you do anything just to hear someone call your name and mean it. If you stay with me, if you're brave enough to hear it all, I'll tell you what really happened. Not the cleaned-up version. Not the kind you can tie up with a lesson or a neat little bow. The truth. Raw, ugly, beautiful, in a way that still terrifies me. Subscribe now to Heartfelt Tales Unfold. Because the truest stories aren't the ones that leave you feeling safe. They're the ones painted in the silent gray between right and wrong. Between love and loss. Between who you were and who you become when everything you thought you knew is gone. I live in a small suburban house, the kind you drive past without thinking twice. White shutters, a porch swing that creaks when the wind hits it right, flower beds that used to bloom because someone cared enough to tend to them. Now, the flowers wilt. The porch swing barely moves. And the whole house feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something that isn't coming back. It used to be filled with laughter. Sunday barbecues, birthday balloons taped crookedly to the walls, the sound of football games roaring through the living room while someone always burned something in the kitchen. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Now it's just heavy. Heavy with silence. Heavy with the kind of memories you don't know what to do with. The kind that cling to the walls, soaked into the paint, pressed into the very floorboards. Grief was a strange guest. It didn't knock. It didn't ask permission. It just moved in one day. Set up shop in every room. Rearranged the furniture of our lives until nothing looked right anymore. And then there was me. A woman in her late 40s, wearing my grief like an old, ragged coat I couldn't take off. I used to be lively. I used to care about the small things, how my hair looked, whether my lipstick matched my shirt, what book club was reading that month. Now, I barely recognize the woman staring back at me from the mirror. Just hollow eyes, sagging skin, a mouth too tired to smile unless someone needed me to. And Adam, my son, 19 years old. Too old to need me the way he once did, too young to carry the weight that landed squarely on his shoulders when his father died. He was always the good one, the polite one, the boy who held doors open, who said yes ma'am even when he didn't have to, who cleaned up his own messes without being asked. But grief changed him too. It made him quieter. More careful with his words, like even speaking too loud might break me completely. It made him bottle everything up inside, tuck it neatly away where no one could see the hurt leaking through the cracks. We became strangers in our own home. Two people bound by blood and broken memories, drifting through the hollow halls of what used to be our life. We were living side by side, but never really touching. Never really reaching across the chasm that had opened between us. The clock in the living room ticked louder than anything else. Each second stretching out like a lifetime. The kind of silence that hums in your bones, that reminds you you're still breathing even when you wish you weren't. The couch still held the indentations from when my husband used to fall asleep there, snoring through late-night reruns. I couldn't bring myself to sit there anymore. It felt like a grave. I started noticing things about Adam I hadn't seen before. The way he filled out his shirts now, shoulders broad like his father's. The way his jawline had sharpened, his voice deepened. The way he moved through the house like a man, but sometimes, just sometimes, curled into himself like the boy I used to rock to sleep. And God help me. Sometimes I caught him looking at me, not the way a son looks at his mother, but with something else flickering behind his eyes. Something raw. Something he was trying to bury. Something I was too afraid to name. And even though everything inside me screamed to look away, I didn't. I couldn't. Because in those moments, in those tiny fractures of time, I saw my own loneliness reflected right back at me. And it scared me more than anything else ever had. The days crawled by. Mornings filled with half-hearted coffee. Afternoons of pretending to be busy, folding laundry that didn't need folding, cleaning counters already spotless. Evenings where we sat at opposite ends of the couch, pretending to watch TV, pretending that neither of us felt the weight of what wasn't being said. I told myself it was just grief. That we were both just drowning, and sometimes drowning people reach for whatever's closest to keep from sinking. But deep down, a part of me knew that if we kept floating like this, something was going to break. It happened on a Friday night. The kind of night that used to mean movie marathons, popcorn fights, falling asleep on the couch halfway through some terrible comedy we'd seen 100 times before. Adam had gone out with some friends earlier. I almost told him not to go. Almost asked him to stay home with me, like the words were clawing at my throat, but I swallowed them back down. He needed to live. He needed something more than this house full of ghosts. I stayed up later than usual, pretending to read a book I couldn't focus on, pretending not to watch the clock. It was almost midnight when I heard his car pull into the driveway. I listened to the door creak open, the familiar heavy thud of his boots on the floor, the soft scrape of his keys being tossed onto the table. And then, I heard nothing, no footsteps coming up the stairs, no door shutting behind him. Just silence, heavy and expectant. I found him standing in the living room, staring at the dark TV screen like it might give him answers. He looked small, somehow. Despite the way he filled the room now with his broad shoulders and grown man's frame, he still looked like my boy. He turned when he heard me, his face half-shadowed in the dim light. His eyes. God, his eyes. There was something raw there. Something reaching. Something I didn't have a name for yet, but I could feel it like a hum beneath my skin. He said it so softly, I almost missed it. Mom, will you sit with me? Like we used to. Just 7 words. 7 little words. And my whole world tilted on its axis. I should have said no. Should have made some excuse. Should have remembered that some things you don't get to revisit once time has moved on. But I didn't. I nodded. And I crossed the room. And I sat down beside him on that old couch that still smelled faintly of the man we'd both lost. At first, it was innocent. Or maybe I just needed to believe it was. We sat there in silence. Close enough to feel the heat coming off his skin. Close enough to remember every little boy giggle, every scraped knee, every whispered, "I love you, Mommy," from a time when life was simpler. He leaned into me, resting his head against my shoulder. A simple, childlike thing. Something that should have brought comfort. But there was a tension in him. A tautness in the way his hand brushed against mine. Not accidental, not casual. A lingering touch that sent a shiver up my spine. I felt his breath, warm and unsteady, against my neck. And when I turned to look at him, his eyes searched my face in a way that stole the air from my lungs. Not like a boy needing his mother. Not like a child seeking safety. But like a man lost at sea, desperate for something, someone, to anchor him. At first, I thought it was just the weight of missing his father. Just the grief spilling out in strange, desperate ways. Just the sadness clinging to both of us like a second skin. But there was a hunger there, a need that went beyond grief, a silent cry for something more, something deeper, something neither of us knew how to ask for or refuse. I felt it the moment his fingers brushed my cheek. Gentle, trembling. I thought he was wiping away a tear. Maybe he was. Or maybe he just needed a reason to touch me. But his hand lingered, longer than it should have. Long enough for my heart to trip over itself. Long enough for every alarm bell inside me to start ringing, only to be muffled by the pounding in my ears. In that moment, the ground beneath us shifted. Softly, irrevocably. And I knew nothing between us would ever be the same again. I don't know how long we sat there, frozen in that awful, beautiful silence. Part of me wanted to pull away, to stand up, to laugh it off, to remind him and myself of the lines that should never be blurred. But I didn't move. I stayed there, feeling the warmth of his hand on my skin, feeling the hunger buried in both of us, feeling the shame start to creep up my spine like cold fingers. What kind of mother notices that? What kind of mother lets herself feel that flicker of something she has no business feeling? I hated myself for it. I hated myself for the way my heart raced, for the way my body responded to something my soul wanted to reject. I told myself he was grieving, that this was harmless, that it was just comfort between two broken people trying to stitch themselves back together with whatever scraps they had left. But even as I whispered those lies to myself, I knew better. I knew there was nothing harmless about the way his breath hitched when I leaned into him. Nothing innocent about the way his hand dropped from my cheek, but grazed my collarbone on its way down, lingering just a second too long. I could still feel my husband in that room. Or maybe it was just the memory of him. The way he used to reach for me in the dark, half asleep, seeking out my warmth without thinking. The way his laugh used to fill these walls. I glanced at the side table, at the thin gold band lying there, abandoned. My wedding ring. I hadn't worn it in months. It clinked against the wood sometimes when I set my coffee down, a small, bitter sound that reminded me of everything I had lost. I thought about slipping it back on, about putting it between us like a wall, a silent reminder of who I was, of what I owed to the dead. But my hands stayed still in my lap, empty, useless. Adam shifted closer. His arm brushed against mine, and I told myself it was an accident. Told myself he didn't mean anything by it. Told myself that if I just sat there, quiet and still, the moment would pass. But it didn't pass. It stretched. It deepened. It tangled itself around us until I could hardly breathe. When he finally stood up, I thought maybe the spell would break. Maybe the night would reset itself, and we could both pretend none of it had happened. But he turned to me, eyes dark and searching, and said in a voice so small I almost missed it, "Will you tuck me in? Just like you used to." I should have said no. Should have reminded him he wasn't a boy anymore. That we weren't those people anymore. But I didn't, because deep down, a selfish, starving part of me ached for it too. Ached for the chance to hold on to something before it slipped away completely. I followed him up the stairs. The floorboards creaked beneath our feet, old and tired and full of memories. The house seemed to breathe around us, heavy and watching. In his room, everything looked exactly the same. Trophies from soccer tournaments long past, books stacked haphazardly on his desk, posters curling at the edges on the walls. He climbed into bed without a word. Pulled the covers up to his chin like he used to when he was 5 years old and afraid of thunderstorms. I sat on the edge of the bed, smoothed his hair back from his forehead, felt him shiver under my touch. And then, just as I leaned in to kiss his temple, just as simple mothers kiss goodnight, his fingers found their way into my hair, tangled there, held me there, longer than goodbye should ever allow. I froze. I didn't know whether to pull away or stay. Didn't know whether to scold him or comfort him. His hand tightened slightly, just a fraction. Enough to make my heart stutter. Enough to make my body forget what my mind was screaming. And in that breathless moment, with the smell of him, clean, familiar, achingly grown, filling my senses, I felt the last of the boundaries we'd fought so hard to keep, fray. Torn between everything I knew was right and everything I couldn't admit I wanted. I told myself it was just grief. Just a moment. Just a mother holding her son. But even as I thought it, I knew it was a lie. Because mothers aren't supposed to notice the way their sons' bodies fill the spaces men leave behind. Mothers aren't supposed to tremble when their sons touch them like that. Mothers aren't supposed to stand on the edge of a line that, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. But there I was, standing there, teetering, waiting for a fall I knew I wouldn't survive. After that night, something between us shifted. We didn't talk about it. We didn't have to. It hung there, thick and invisible, shaping every glance, every touch, every breath we took near each other. The late-night talks started first. They used to be rare, reserved for thunderstorms or bad dreams. Now, they happened almost every night. Long after the house had gone quiet, after the world outside had surrendered to sleep, we would find ourselves sitting across from each other, whispering in the dark. It started small. Memories of his father. Stories we had both forgotten until grief shook them loose. Laughter that sounded more like crying. Then it turned heavier. His fears. His loneliness. His aching confusion about how to be a man when the only man he had to model himself after was gone. And I listened. God, I listened like my life depended on it. Because maybe it did. Because in his words, in his broken confessions, I found pieces of myself that I thought had died too. The couch became our place. Our island. The only space in the house that still felt alive somehow. At first, we sat with a cushion between us. Polite distance. Safe space. But little by little, that gap closed. Our knees brushed. Our arms bumped. And neither of us moved away. It wasn't planned. It wasn't spoken. It was a slow slide, so gentle we could almost pretend we didn't notice. One night, he stretched out across the couch, head falling into my lap without a second thought. I froze for a moment, heart hammering against my ribs so loud I was sure he could hear it. But he didn't say anything. He just closed his eyes, letting out a soft sigh, like being near me was the first time he'd breathed all day. I told myself not to move, to keep my hands folded, to stare at the TV, to pretend this was just innocent. But my fingers had a mind of their own. They found their way into his hair. Soft, gentle strokes. The way I used to when he was little and feverish and needed his mama to make the world right again. I traced the curve of his temple, the line of his jaw, not thinking, not guarding, just feeling. The warmth of him seeped into my skin, pulling something out of me I thought I had buried deep enough to stay dead. Loneliness. Need. The terrible, aching hunger to be touched, to be needed, to be seen. He shifted slightly, turning his face into my palm. His breath was warm against my wrist. Hot. Unsteady. I should have pulled away. I should have remembered who we were. But I didn't. His lips brushed against the inside of my wrist. A soft, trembling touch. Not like a son. Not like a boy seeking comfort. But like a man. Hungry for connection. Starving for it. I didn't pull away fast enough. My breath caught in my throat. My whole body went still, afraid that even moving would shatter whatever fragile spell had woven itself between us. He kissed me again. Not hard. Not demanding. Just a whisper of a kiss against my skin. A question he was too afraid to ask out loud. And I didn't answer with words. I didn't answer at all. I just sat there, letting it happen. Letting it fill the hollow spaces inside me that had ached for so long I forgot what it felt like to be whole. Some part of me screamed that this was wrong, that I was the adult, that it was my job to stop this before it became something neither of us could take back. But that part of me was drowning under the weight of something deeper, something older than right and wrong, Something that had nothing to do with titles like mother or son. It was just two souls. Shattered. Lonely. Reaching for each other in the dark. Pretending we could find salvation in each other's brokenness. We didn't talk about it the next morning. We never did. But the silence between us was different now. Not heavy like grief. Not sharp like guilt. It was something else. Something dangerous. Something waiting. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before that silence exploded into something neither of us would be able to escape. It happened on a night when the sky opened up and poured every ounce of its sorrow onto the world. The kind of storm that rattles the windows, shakes the walls, makes even grown adults flinch at the crack of thunder splitting the air. I was in the kitchen when the lights went out. 1 second, the world was humming with electricity. The next, we were swallowed by darkness. I stood there for a moment, frozen, heart beating faster than it should have. It was just a storm. Just a blown transformer, probably. Nothing to be afraid of. But fear has a funny way of creeping in when you're already carrying too much loneliness. It sinks its claws into the cracks you've been trying so hard to hold together. I fumbled through the drawers, found an old candle and a book of matches. My hands shook as I lit the wick, the tiny flame flickering uncertainly against the shadows stretching across the room. That's when I heard him. Adam's footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Coming down the stairs. He didn't say anything, just stood there in the doorway, lit only by the soft, shivering light between us. His hair was mussed from sleep. His eyes wide and uncertain. For a moment, he looked so much like the little boy who used to crawl into our bed during storms that my chest physically ached. Without thinking, without giving myself a chance to second guess, I reached out my hand to him. And he came. No hesitation. No words. Just the quiet, desperate movement of a boy. No, a man who didn't want to be alone in the dark. He wrapped his arms around me, burying his face in my neck. I felt the heat of him, the trembling in his body, the way he clung to me like he might break apart if I let go. I held him. I told myself it was fine, that it was natural, that it was what any mother would do. But it wasn't just comfort we were clinging to. There was something else thrumming between us. Something dangerous. Something alive. I could feel his breath against my skin, hot and uneven. I could feel the way his hands pressed into my back, not like a boy seeking protection, but like a man reaching for something he didn't even know how to name. The candlelight danced around us, throwing shadows against the walls, hiding us from the parts of ourselves that still knew better. And then, he pulled back just enough to look at me. His eyes searched mine, desperate, pleading, afraid. I should have stepped away. I should have said something. I should have broken the spell. But I didn't. We stood there, breathing each other's air, trembling in the small circle of light, the storm raging outside and inside us both. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was him. Maybe it doesn't matter. Our faces inched closer, drawn together like magnets that had been fighting it for too long. And then, our lips brushed. An accidental kiss. Soft. Tentative. Testing the water that had been rising around us for weeks, months, maybe longer. We froze, lips barely touching, eyes wide open. I waited for him to pull away. I waited for myself to pull away. Neither of us did. Instead, the kiss deepened. Slow, hesitant, full of all the broken things we didn't know how to say. It wasn't a kiss of passion. It wasn't lust, not really. It was need. Raw, ragged. A desperate reaching for something that might stitch the pieces of us back together, even if only for a moment. When the candle flickered and died, so did the last shred of the wall between us. We stood there in the dark, our bodies pressed together, our breaths mingling, our hearts pounding so loud it drowned out the storm outside. I knew, even then, that we had crossed a line we could never uncross. I knew that nothing would ever be the same. And still, I didn't let go. The morning after was the worst. I woke to sunlight pouring through the windows, warm and bright and cruel. The kind of morning that made the whole world look fresh, like nothing bad could live under a sky so blue. But inside me, everything was cracked wide open. I found myself lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to pretend I hadn't just destroyed the only thing that still tethered me to the woman I used to be. I could hear Adam moving downstairs. His footsteps, usually steady and sure, sounded hesitant, like he was afraid the floor might give way beneath him if he stepped too hard. I stayed upstairs longer than I needed to, pretending to fold laundry that didn't need folding, pretending that if I just waited long enough, time would somehow rewind itself. When I finally came down, he was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. We didn't say anything. We didn't even look at each other. The silence between us was a living thing. Thick, suffocating, stretching out, wrapping around our throats, choking any words we might have dared to speak. I busied myself in the kitchen, scrubbing countertops that were already spotless, wiping down the fridge door 3 times in a row, rearranging the spice rack alphabetically, anything to keep from looking at him. Anything to keep from feeling the weight of what we'd done. Adam got up without a word. I heard the front door open, then close softly behind him. No goodbye. No explanation. Just absence. And God, it hurt. Worse than the grief that had swallowed me after my husband died. Worse than the loneliness that had gnawed at my bones every night since. Because this time, it was my fault. This time, I had no one to blame but myself. The next few days blurred together. I cooked meals neither of us ate. I cleaned rooms no one had touched. I did laundry that didn't need doing, folded and refolded towels until my hands were raw. I tried to scrub away the memory. Tried to erase the feel of his lips on my wrist, the weight of his body pressed against mine, the look in his eyes that still haunted me when I closed mine. But the harder I tried, the louder it echoed inside me. Adam stayed away as much as he could. He left early in the mornings, came home late at night. When he was home, he barely spoke. The boy who used to tell me everything, every stupid joke, every silly fear, had become a stranger overnight. And I couldn't blame him. I couldn't even look him in the eye without feeling like the worst kind of monster. We danced around each other like wounded animals, polite, careful, brittle enough to shatter if either of us breathed too hard. I kept telling myself that maybe, given enough time, it would fade. That maybe we could pretend it hadn't happened. That maybe we could glue the pieces back together and convince ourselves the cracks weren't there. But deep down, I knew better. Some lines, once crossed, carve themselves into your skin, into your memory, into the very air between you. 3 mornings later, I came downstairs, hoping maybe, just maybe, today would be different. That maybe he would sit at the table with a bowl of cereal, tease me about my terrible cooking, flash me that crooked smile that had always been so much like his father's. But the house was too quiet, too still. I rounded the corner, and there they were. His bags, packed, neatly stacked by the front door. No note, no goodbye, just absence. Final, crushing. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at those bags, waiting for him to come back, to tell me it was a mistake, that he wasn't really leaving. But he didn't. And the silence that swallowed the house whole that morning told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't running away from the house. He was running away from me. And I had no one to blame but myself. I sat on the floor for a long time after Adam left. The kind of sitting that isn't really sitting at all, just collapsing. Like the weight of everything finally caved in, and my body had nothing left to fight it with. I didn't cry. Not at first. I just sat there, staring at the space where he used to be, the space he had filled so completely without even knowing it. And all the questions started crawling in. Was it grief that led me there? Was it the long, hollow ache of missing my husband so fiercely that I lost my grip on who I was supposed to be? Or was it something more selfish? Some dark, ugly part of me that reached for the first warmth offered, no matter the cost? I tried to tell myself I had been trying to comfort him. That I was just lost, just broken, just desperate to hold on to something, someone, before the loneliness swallowed me whole. But those were just pretty lies I told myself in the dark. The truth was colder. I failed him, not just as a mother, as a person. I was supposed to be the strong one, the safe place, the unbreakable line between what hurt and what healed. And instead, I became the wound. I took a boy who trusted me more than anyone else in the world and handed him a weight he never should have had to carry. I told myself he was almost grown, that he understood, that he wanted it too. But what does a 19-year-old boy really know about grief? About love twisted by loneliness into something unrecognizable? He needed a mother. And I gave him something else. Something that left a scar on both of us so deep, I don't think either of us will ever fully heal. I thought losing my husband was the worst pain I would ever know. But this was different. This was the pain you carve into your own flesh.